In the last November balance patch, the siege mode on the striker battleships has been changed. It has been nerfed, however, the siege mode on the Raven striker got actually improved. Now, is the improvement enough to make the siege mode on the ship useful against subcapitals? Well, today I want to find that out. Now, I did fly the Raven striker mainly as a tank, didn't really rely on the siege mode because, well, it was practically useless against anything smaller than a station. Now, the ship stats and the trait description seems to be about the same. The Raven striker has a nice damage bonus, nice activation time bonus, and a flight velocity bonus. However, no explosion velocity bonus, which is the most important aspect of the missile damage application alongside with the missile explosion radius. Now, the attributes and fittings are also the same. I like to mention that the Raven striker has a very good capacitor. This is something that I think I haven't noticed before, but the capacitor on this ship is actually pretty good, which is, to be expected because this is a shield tank, and shield boosters do use a lot of capacitor. The rest of the stats of the ship are mostly nice. The Raven striker is not the fastest, of course, but it has a pretty good tank. The Raven striker is the tankiest striker battleship, and it has its own use in a fleet and also can be very fun in PvP. Now, how did I build the ship? So, I would say the ideal battleship with missiles is the Typhoon 2, because it has basically the best missile damage application. Now, with this current build, I have about 2000 DPS with the C-type large missile launchers, or cruise missiles. They have a decent flight velocity, however, the explosion velocity and radius are not going to be the best. The range is 136 kilometers, which is nice. In the medium slots, one Scrambler, Web, Neutralizer and Nosferatu. In the low slots, a classic active tank, triple adaptives, one battery, one afterburner and one shield booster. However, you can also slap a dual shield booster build if you like to go with a tanky build. It also works really well. Now, since I'll be testing out the damage application and the overall damage on the ship, I did change the rigs and I gave the ship the same rigs that I had on the Typhoon 2. That way it should be quite accurate if I go and compare the damage output on the Typhoon and on the Raven striker. I focused on maximum possible missile damage, rate of fire, and explosion velocity and explosion radius. These are the most important aspects and factors on the missile damage application. Paper DPS is one thing, but paper DPS is practically useless if you can't apply that DPS on your target, and most of the missile ships kind of do suffer from that issue, with the exception of the Barghest and with the exception of the Typhoon 2. Okay, let's undock and let me show you the current stats of this current build, and then I will also show you the build that I'll be using to test out the maximum possible DPS. Should get good DPS on paper. However, how much of that will be applied to the target? Well, that's something that we will find out. Okay, sorry for the weird cut. I had to adjust the modules because they were literally all over the place for some reason. Okay, let's turn on the adaptives and now let's take a look at the active stats on the Raven. Now, with a DPS build, I didn't expect big resistances, but 66, 75, 79 and 83 is okay. The DPS is 2044.39, and surprisingly, the Raven is still faster than a Balgorn in the Afterburner mode, so that's kind of funny. And we have this build with dual adaptives, dual boosters, also pretty nice. Can be quite good if you go with a full tank build. Can also work with a DPS build, but with a full tank build I feel like it would work a lot better. After all, the Raven Striker has an excellent tank. Now, the implant that I'll be using is the Warhead Charge. This is one of my favorite implants. It's so fun to use. Now, for the Raven, it will be important because it can reduce the explosion radius, and it can also increase the explosion velocity. Now, for the general units, I'll be using a full DPS setup, and I'll have this missile guidance computer into... Let me just quickly change that. I don't need extra range, I need extra damage application for this thing, and it will be the precision correction, which should get the job done with the missile guidance computer. And I think everything is set and ready. Now the DPS will be a little bit different, and the build will be now a DPS build, 2,600 cold DPS in station with a DPS build and DPS rigs, 91.86 explosion velocity, and radius 169 meters. Okay, let's undock and let's see the active stats. Now, if you remember, before the patch, the explosion velocity would be literally 1 meter per second in the siege mode on this thing. Well, with the change, it should technically be 800 times better, so from minus 900% to minus 100%. However, it's still going to be minus 100%, and I don't expect anything. I don't expect the stats to look really good when I enter the siege mode on this. When I enter the siege mode and when I look at the missile stats. Okay, siege mode active, and weapon damage plus 100%, weapon range minus 10%, turret tracking minus 95, missile explosion velocity minus 90, missile explosion radius plus 100, ship velocity minus 90, ship signature radius plus 100, and cannot warp. So it was quite different. It used to be different before the patch, but technically buffed, so we're about to see the damage. 3,700 DPS, 9.19 meter per second is the explosion velocity, 338 meters is the explosion radius. Yeah, this is still not going to do anything to subcapitals, but it will definitely hurt big ships and stations. But against subcapitals, nope, I don't see this doing well against a battleship or a cruiser or a frigate. So in that aspect, nothing much changed. 159 kilometer is the maximum range in the precision mode. I mean in the long range sniper mode, and in the precision mode, it's going to be 9 meters. Yeah, it's not going to be that good. 169 meters is the explosion radius. 9.19 meter per second is the explosion velocity. You know, it's actually a lot better than before, but again, minus 100% and plus 100% explosion radius is not going to help at the application much. 4,500 in the siege mode, 5,500 with one ballistic control. With the second one, it's 6,600, and with the third one, the DPS is 7,300. This is with explosive missiles that improve the damage a lot more, but unfortunately you ain't going to apply anything of that DPS to your target because, well, the explosion velocity is practically non-existent. But outside of the siege mode, the stats would be pretty nice. 123 meters per second and 163 meters is the explosion radius and velocity. Looks okay on the... 12.3 meters per second. My apologies. But yeah, outside of the siege mode, the stats would actually be really nice, and it would do some pretty good damage. Not nearly as near as much damage as the other strikers, but against big ships, carriers, dreadnought stations, or something like that, something similar like that, this will be very good. Now with rapid missiles, the DPS is a little bit lower, and we're about to find out what's the stats on the rapid missiles inside of the siege mode. I really don't think that it's going to change a lot, but we will find out. Now this build perhaps can be used in high sec, but in low sec and in low sec I would not be using it because it has practically no tank, and I personally prefer tank over DPS. 3,400 DPS with the siege mode, 9.32 meter per second explosion velocity, 143 meter is the explosion radius, 41.51 kilometer is the range. Yeah, this is not going to do much against, perhaps might do something against battleships, but rapid missiles are mostly designed to engage cruisers, battlecruisers, frigates, so yeah, it's not going to do a lot of damage to those things. 53.96 in the long range mode, and in the precision mode 71.68 meters is the explosion radius, and velocity is about the same. So yeah, it's not going to do much against smaller targets because of the very poor explosion velocity. 3,500 DPS with one ballistic control, with the second one 4,200, and with the third one the DPS is 4,700. This is with the explosive missiles, 93.18 and 71.6 meters, which looks really nice when it's, you know, outside of the siege mode, but in the siege mode it's not going to apply any of that 6,700 DPS, which is a shame. Would be a very, very, very fun ship if it could apply even half of that DPS, but unfortunately it can't. Perhaps, you know, against a dreadnought, but if you go in the siege mode against a dreadnought, you are a very easy target. I mean, just look at some of the revelation videos that I did and what I do to battleships when they are not moving. They get deleted. Okay, let me return the implant to the default stats, let me dock, and let's take a look at the next weapon system. The next weapon system are the torpedo launchers. They have very nice DPS, but the flight velocity, explosion radius will be horrible. Yeah, I can only imagine how much damage this will apply. And of course the range on the torpedoes is a little bit shorter. Let's undock and let's see the active stats with the implant and with the siege mode, as well as the other modules that I have installed on this ship. Now, don't get me wrong, I like the Raven Striker. I think it's a pretty fun ship, and I like tanky ships, and this ship does have a pretty fantastic tank. But it's really a shame that it cannot apply any of this DPS. But I still do like the ship, even with the useless siege mode. 3,700 DPS. With the explosive missiles in the siege mode, it's 5,300. Unfortunately, you're not going to apply much of that damage on the target, with a 461 meter explosion radius and 9.41 meter explosion velocity. Even a capital ship can easily withstand that. Okay, let's go back to the normal mode with the implant. 5,300 with one ballistic control. With the second one, it's 6,300, and with the third one it's 7,000. This is in the siege mode, and with explosive missiles it's 8,600. Unfortunately, not much of that will be applied, but you can apply good DPS, 6,000 DPS actually, if you go outside of the siege mode, and this is actually acceptable. This is okay, can work really, really well. 6,000 DPS with torpedo launchers is really solid, and I'm quite satisfied with that result. 34 kilometers with the long range mode, and with the precision mode it's 150 meter explosion radius, 94.52 meter is the explosion velocity. So if you combine precision missiles without the siege mode, you get some pretty good damage application on the Raven. But once you enter siege mode, that application goes, I don't know, gets consumed by the void, I guess, and it's basically practically gone. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Okay. So let's actually put this to practical use. Let's see how much damage I can do to some actual ships. So I have entered siege mode and the damage output drastically went down. Now comparing this to before, it is a big improvement. I mean, I used to do literally 1 damage to destroyers, 1 damage to frigates, and about 20-30 damage to battleships and battlecruisers. Now I actually do 200, well, 33 in the case of this frigate, which is a massive improvement from 1 damage, but on a grand scale it's basically no improvement at all. So don't use the siege mode against small ships, because yeah, it's not going to end well. And I can see a lot of players panic and they enter the siege mode by accident and they lose their ship. So for the Raven Striker, don't use the siege mode in missions. For PvP, don't use the siege mode unless you are shooting a big capital ship or a station, because your damage application will be much better if you don't enter the siege mode on this ship. However, I would say that it does some good damage when the siege mode is offline. I can see that the implant helps quite a bit with this ship. Now the question, which one is better, the Typhoon 2 or the Raven Striker? And this is a hot debate. Even as I'm recording this, there is probably a bunch of players arguing about that. Now, from my perspective, as a player who usually does PvP only, who hunts, who camps and things like that, I am usually looking for a ship that can apply the damage that you can see on the fitting window, and the Typhoon 2 does do that job really well. I also aim for ships that are tanky or that are fast, and the Raven does tick the boxes as well because it's tanky. So in the end, I would say it's quite situational. Both ships have their place, and both of them can be really solid for both PvP or PvE. Depends on the build that you give the ship. Now, as you can see here by my builds, I usually aim for maximum tank or maximum DPS, and so far that seemed to be working really well. I haven't encountered any problems with such a way of fitting the ship. Against cruisers, I do basically no damage, even with the precision mode, which is to be expected. I mean, it wasn't really much of a surprise to me when I saw basically no damage done on small ships, because that's what I saw on the missile stats, and with those missile stats you can't really expect to do a lot of damage to small ships. Now, I don't have any capital ship to wreck it, so can't really test the damage application on a capital ship. However, based on the numbers, it should do really well. Now, the main purpose of the strikers was to engage structures and to engage capital ships. So the Raven Striker does fulfill that role really nicely, and I would say if you want to go and hunt big capital ships, then a Raven Striker fleet might be a very nice choice. However, a tanky capital ship might be a problem, so keep that in mind. A tanky capital ship requires a really good fleet to be able to be destroyed. But I'm quite happy with the alpha damage on the Raven Striker. He does do really well with the cruise missiles. Now against the battle cruiser, yeah, the damage is basically non-existent in the siege mode. The extra rate of fire does look very nice. Unfortunately, I have to turn off the siege mode in order to apply any damage. So that means any ship with an afterburner, any ship that is moving, it's going to avoid 99% of damage from the missiles. Even if it is a battleship, it will easily avoid most of the damage from a Raven Striker if it is in the siege mode. However, as you can see, it can also be a pretty nice ship for high sec. I mean, all ships can be pretty good for high sec, to be honest. Even the Nestor can be really good if you go with a DPS build. However, the Nestor has a lot different roles nowadays because it has so many new stats. On a battleship, about 120 damage per hit with the missiles, and once the siege mode is offline, the damage is drastically improved. Of course, once all missiles start to reach the target. There we go. Now it's at 2,000, 2,500 per missile, which is pretty solid. About 25 to 35,000 alpha hits on a battleship, and that is honestly really good. Now, one thing that I like about this game is the fact that you can make basically anything work. So I'm also glad that I made the Raven Striker work, because the ship also deserves to get some love, and it's always nice to have a lot of ships to play around with. I know that I'm again looking for some new ships to fly, because I fly one ship, then I jump to the other ship, then I jump to the third ship, and well, maxing out the kill marks on every one of them. The Revelation is slowly finishing up with the kill marks, almost at 900. So very soon it's going to be the maximum possible kill mark count, and then I don't know what I'll do with the ship. I mean, I'll fly it, but not really sure. Not really sure if I will wait for the chambers to be released, or if I just go and buy a new dreadnought. I don't know. We will find out. Now I'll dock after the ship is destroyed, and I will change the build into rapid missiles, just to see how well the rapid missiles will work. And now with rapid missiles. So, the rapid missiles have much faster rate of fire, they're a little bit slower, and they have a lower DPS, which means that the ship will spit out missiles like there is no tomorrow. And the rapid missiles work really well on the Typhoon 2. Now, what would be the optimal weapon choice for the Typhoon 2? Cruise missiles or rapid missiles? In high sec islands I would use rapid missiles, in low sec I would use a long range cruise missile build. That way you can be safe from any potential pirates that might jump into your mission. Now, as for the Raven Striker, this ship can use all weapon systems easily. Can also work really well with rapid missiles, can also work really well with cruise missiles. And I would say that the rapid missiles have very nice damage application. Now, of course, if I go and enter the siege mode, the damage application will basically die off, so I wouldn't be using the siege mode even with the rapid missiles, because the damage application will go down very quickly, and the rapid missiles would not be able to easily shoot down cruisers and battlecruisers. Now, battleships, perhaps they can do something against battleships. We will test that out very soon here, but based on the numbers I don't really expect them to do much against a battleship. If the battleship is webbed and scrambled, perhaps, but that's in a very special situation. In a fleet, for example, it might work, but if solo, if running a mission, or if in low sec and you get jumped by a cruiser, then I would not be using a siege mode against the cruisers or frigates, because it will not do much and it will just make your ship an even easier target. Okay, let's see how much damage I do to this Dominix in the siege mode, and yes, just as I expected, basically no damage. Scratching the shield off that Dominix. Let's turn off the siege mode, and now the DPS is going to be drastically increased, as expected. Now, I like how there's so many missiles flying that by the time the missiles land, the damage is so weird, because you can't really tell if it's the damage from the siege mode or the damage from the normal mode, because this ship does launch missiles very quickly. It's very fun to use the missile implant on missile ships, because they do launch a lot of missiles, as you can see here. Basically every second there is 3 missiles flying towards the target, and this is why the missile implant is one of the most fun implants to use. Okay, let's turn on the ballistic controls. So, even with rapid missiles, you are not going to do much damage to anything. With the siege mode, and honestly that is to be expected. However, if you go and fight capital ships, then I wouldn't be using rapid missiles. I would probably using cruise missiles and torpedo launchers. So using rapid missiles with the Raven Striker, with the siege mode, is just not going to be a very good idea. In most cases, of course. In some special occasions it might be good, but for the average fight, yeah, it's not going to be doing much. However, I would say that it still has some really nice alpha damage, and it does hurt frigates if you avoid using the special mode on this ship. And it can be very fun. Honestly, it's ridiculous how many missiles this thing can launch. Just look at the effects. The missiles have, I would say, the best visual effects in the game, especially after the implant update, and especially after the recent graphics update. The graphics update that they made, it made me run to. It made it's a little bit difficult to run two accounts at the same time because of the heat, and the battery just vanishes in a very short amount of time, which is to be expected. However, it still does run really, really well. Now, I would also like to ask you, which ship do you prefer, the Typhoon 2 or the Raven Striker? I'm very curious to know how many of you like to fly this ship and how many of you like to fly the Typhoon 2. In my case, I like to fly both. I do enjoy both ships. After all, I say that every ship has its own place, and I keep loyal to that. I don't plan to change my mind on that anytime soon. And let's dock, and let's take the torpedo launchers for a ride. The capacitor was really stable, actually. That's why I said that this ship has a very good capacitor. It did last a very long time. It was actually capacitor stable, surprisingly. And now let's take the torpedo launchers for a ride. I did land right at 0. And now
we're under attack.
Let's start shooting at the battleships with the siege mode to see how much damage I'll do. 479, 478 per hit. Yeah, that's not good at all. Let's just turn the siege mode off. And let's focus fire on the battleship. The damage got drastically improved. The damage skyrocketed, to be honest. This is 6000 DPS. Can be really good for high sec, I would say. This build that I currently use can even be improved if you go and remove the afterburner for something else. But this build, this exact setup can be really nice for high sec missions. Now, I don't do high sec missions. Usually the only time where I do a mission is when I live stream or when I test out ships. In most cases I do PvP and only PvP and nothing besides PvP, but I also like to do exploration. So that's basically how things are and how things go. Very surprised at the excellent alpha damage and excellent DPS that this thing can deliver without the siege mode, of course. And it can be used in a similar way as I use the Macarial, in a similar way as I use some of the other ships as well. The only drawback would be the speed. This ship is not the fastest, however, in most cases I don't think that it's going to be much of a problem. Now, I haven't been flying a Raven Striker into PvP yet, however I'm looking into the options of what ship I can fly. Thought about getting the Space Pen, also thought about getting the Nestor. Nestor PvP would be quite hilarious. And I haven't really decided on what to do just yet. And I believe that I still have enough time to decide what ship I will fly next. You know, I also have the option to save ISK for a future ship that might be released. There is also the option to go and get some of the new carriers that will be out in a couple days, although those things might be a little bit too expensive even for me. And they're going to be very rare, very expensive and very rare faction carriers. Very interesting. When I made the video about the potential what they could potentially release. My best bet was on faction carriers or special carriers, something with a specialized role, and now it makes sense. Specialized carriers, special carriers, faction carriers, they have a specialized role, so everything did make sense in the end. Okay, let me quickly destroy the last two ships. My initial thoughts on the Raven Striker, it's a good ship, it's a fun ship, I really do like it. The siege mode is definitely not that much improved when put into practical use. However, it still is a very good ship, very tanky ship, and the main thing on the Raven Striker is the tank. Can be really nice in high-sec islands with a torpedo build because of its very high DPS with the implant, with the missile implant. You can improve the application and you can improve the DPS, which, you know, makes this little ship very nice and honestly quite enjoyable to use. Missiles are still a very nice weapon system, I like them. Every weapon system has its own thing. Every weapon system has its ups and downs, which makes the game fun and quite dynamic, I would say.
Docking request
So,
accepted.
that was the Raven Striker after the November balance patch. As you can see, the improvement on paper is there, and on paper it's massive, but when put to practical use, the siege mode buff on the Raven Striker is, I would say, about the same, and the other siege modes on the other strikers has now been, I would say, roughly balanced out, so that's, I guess, one good thing. And with that being said, hope that you enjoyed, stay safe, fly safe, and I'll see you next time.